Welcome to the Washdown podcast. And tonight's guest is Josh Krasovec. And Josh has been on the show before, so you guys all know him. We had a great conversation about standards. And we were we went all over the place, but it was a great conversation. Hope you guys get something out of it. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. On YouTube and Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music. We're all over the place. So, here you go. The Washdown Podcast with Josh Krasovec. Thanks. I have a feeling maybe I'm going to get canceled.
Yikes.
Can you cancel somebody this small?
I feel like you can kind of cancel anybody these days.
Here's the only reason that I think I'm uncancelable. I'm like Dave Chappelle. You can't cancel me because basically nobody knows about me to cancel me.
There's that.
Anonymity. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, there's that.
Oh, no. Well, Josh, thanks for coming back on the show, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about, we'll probably talk about a whole bunch of things, but we're going to talk about standards and how police departments and fire departments across the country are lowering their standards to get cops and firefighters through the door and to get applications and applicants in.
That's the word, yeah.
The potential fallout and consequences of lowering said standards.
Yes. So, where do we start? Well, I guess what we were talking about right before that, you were talking about
Memphis.
And I mentioned Washington, some things in Washington State.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Memphis, and doing research on that whole incident, come to find out they have been dropping the standard, their hiring practice standards and the criteria that you would need to meet to even be considered since 2018. They are, according to one article that I read today, I think they had something like 2,400 officers around 2018, and they're down to...
That's a pretty big department.
Yeah, well, they're down to like 1,800 now. So they're like 500 short, 500 or 600 short.
Yeah.
Which... that's a pretty big hit, and they lost a lot, just like everybody else did with George Floyd and the protest that followed that. A lot of people, and that was nationwide, had a lot of cops that said, I'm freaking done.
Yeah.
So anyway, they started lowering their standards. The initial first step was you no longer have to have a degree to work here. Okay, I can kind of, not great, but I get that. And
I kind of go either way.
Yeah.
I kind of go either way.
I didn't have to have a degree to get on the fire department.
Right.
Now, police department's a little bit different. There's more stuff that you got to do from my understanding. And more paperwork. Mm-hmm. You guys have so much paperwork.
Dude.
But it went all the way down to, and that kind of started to right the ship until the George Floyd thing.
So only lessening the education requirement then started to bring...
Yeah,
okay.
It started to bring it back up a little bit. They weren't completely out of the woods yet. And then that happened, and they lost a ton of people to be back down to that 2018 or whatever it was level. So now they're even further behind the 8 ball, and they can't get people in. Well, then they decide they're going to drop it down even further. No degree, less work experience, this, that, and the other thing, until finally, I guess this past year, according to the article that I read, they're offering waivers for people to apply who have felonies. I don't know what felonies. They can get around that somehow. To my understanding, if you had a felony, you couldn't be a police officer.
Well, you can't carry a gun.
Yeah.
If I understand how it all works correctly, you're not allowed to have a firearm. So there's that. I mean, it raises the question of, so do they not? And how does that work?
Yeah.
Something similar to this actually came up a few years ago here in Kansas City. And I don't know, the down and dirty details of it, but do you remember Funkhauser?
Yes.
At one point that was suggested. Essentially the same stuff. Like, how do we boost recruitment? And if I recall correctly, I think it was more of like an off-the-cuff statement that he made. And, his opponents then sort of latched onto it. It's kind of like, look at, this guy doesn't even understand the rules. But it's not the first time, is the point, I guess, that maybe that's come up. I would be really curious to see how you want to make that work. I mean, to be cool about it, for lack of a better word, what are the felonies, I guess, that you would count? And so I would want to look at it and say, I think I understand what you're trying to accomplish here, but how are you going about doing that?
Yeah.
And it's a slippery slope if you can even get started on it. I mean,
yeah. Well, if it's a felony, it's a felony.
Right.
They're felonies for a reason.
Yeah.
So I don't understand that. And, I read another article, and it was written by former police officer and I think a police chief maybe. They're consultants now, and that's what they do is like analyze police departments and all of the, minutia and stuff. And they were talking about how by lowering these standards and everybody being short-staffed, about how it may have directly led to that incident, because you have officers who probably shouldn't have been officers in the first place that wouldn't have been able to make the cut if the normal standard had been enforced. And then 2, they're given subpar training because, staffing issues, you can't pull people out of circulation to train. And then 2, they wouldn't have had enough experience to be in a specialized unit anywhere else. Because most of those guys, I think they had like 5 years or less on. And I know 3 or 4 of them were hired after the standard had been lowered.
That video is tough to watch. So, a question that comes to my mind is, if their staffing numbers are so low, how are they still getting away with specialized units? Here locally, those are the first things to go, and those are the cuts you've heard about. Mounted patrol in the last few years. There's been some stuff with like the tactical elements here recently. But back to that video, the thing that stuck out to me was, given the number of people involved in that situation, there wasn't anything that ever looked like anybody was actually just trying to control the guy.
Yeah, no, it was just a beating.
Even in the sequence that I saw, if I understand it correctly, starts with like a body cam he's on the ground and they're by his car. Looks like the initial stop. And I think there's 3, 4, maybe it seems like at 1.5 people there. And look, I'm not Royce Gracie or anything like that, but even if you've been trained at the minimal level, there were opportunities to gain control of that person. And another thing, to each their own, right? Everybody handles situations like that differently. But another thing that stuck out to me was the number of times that this guy got sprayed. The reason I say that is because, I don't know if you have, but it sucks to go hands-on with somebody that's been sprayed. It sucks to be around it in general. Mm-hmm. So, you have typically somebody that doesn't want to go in handcuffs. Mm-hmm. And then you cover them with like oil from hell. Mm-hmm. And now they're just damn near impossible to control. And your face hurts. Mm-hmm. And you can't see, and you're sneezing, and you can't breathe. So, I wasn't there, but what I saw in that moment was a little bit of inexperience in those situations, is what it seemed like. And then the video that it looks like it's from a pole cam or
it was
like a traffic cam.
It was a pole cam.
Straight up goonery. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd seen that before, just never by anybody in a uniform.
Yeah.
And really tough to watch. Mm-hmm. Watched it with some other people on the job, and it was really a heart-sinking moment, man. Like after everything.
Yeah.
After everything. And not just one or two, but it seemed like damn near everybody that was there. Mm-hmm. And that's even hard to say, man, because it's, if you've been, when you've been on the job, you know what other people don't know. Mm-hmm. And so those criticisms are that much more hurtful because it comes from a place of ignorance, right?
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily in your lane to like blow apart their veil of safety or their paradigm or whatever. And so when they're legitimate criticisms and you're seeing it happen right there, it's sort of like who is this? How did this happen?
Yeah.
Who are these people? How did they get a badge? What's occurring here? You know? And dude, it's so hard to even, it's just, it's a tough video to watch, man.
Yeah. I have a feeling at various points during this podcast, we may both be on soapboxes and ranting a little bit. But like from my perspective, and I had to have conversations with all of the guys in my district about the firefighters' actions. Mm. Because, I mean, they fired 3 firefighters over that. The lieutenant who was in charge, who never got out of the pumper, and then the 2 firefighters who did get out and go over, but then walked away from him for like 9 minutes. Like, stuff happens. Mm-hmm. And, I've been on calls and where it's like dirtbag 1 has done something to hurt innocent family. And everybody's messed up. Obviously, innocent family probably messed up more. Dirtbag 1's fine. But he still has to be treated. So you have to treat both, and you got to give them the same level of care because that's your job.
Yep.
Doesn't mean you have to like it. Doesn't mean it's easy. But this situation, and I'm not calling him a dirtbag. That's not what I'm saying. But it's easy to let emotions come in and not be professional about that stuff. And then for those firefighters, I'm sure it was a horrible situation of you pull up to this scene, this dude's got his ass kicked, there's a bunch of cops around, and they're telling you what a piece of crap this guy is. That's all you know. Mm-hmm. So it's real easy to go, oh, well, I'm just going to shoot the shit with my cop buddies and fuck that guy. Mm-hmm. And we can't do that. Like, I mean, it's never been okay. It's even less okay now.
You know where I think part of it comes from is, you'll hear about, hey, did you see the video of this incident, or did you hear about this thing that happened? And it's very frequent where you'll see something and the way it's presented, there's more to the story, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think people become numb to that idea that like what you have at face value is simply face value. Like what you think you're seeing is what you're seeing. Yeah. And that's not to make an excuse, but that's the reason I say that is going into watching that video, there was a part of me that was even like, okay, well, what's not presented here?
Yeah. What did he do that led to this?
Right.
Because I had the same thought.
And so then watching the video, I got to tell you, man, there was this moment of like, at this point, it doesn't even matter. Like mm-hmm. None of the boxes that need to get checked are getting checked. What are we doing?
Yeah.
So it's really hard to make sense of. Yeah, man. I think how I came to see it was Questlove is the drummer mm-hmm. for the Roots.
Yeah.
Something on his social media that was like, just don't watch it. Like it's hard to watch. And I thought, well, now
Yeah. Like, well, now I gotta watch
right,
it.
Because all the ones that were people are like, look at this person that is 100% a victim, and everybody that did this to this person should be burned at the stake. You watch it and you're like, okay, well, that's, an example that comes to mind is, I think it's Jacob Blake, the guy that got shot 6-7 times, something like that. And a few of them were in the back.
Oh, in Wisconsin? Is that what you're talking about?
I think so. Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
So, hey, you can quarterback the breakdown of that situation, right? But when you learn what actually happened, what transpired, who this dude is, why he was wanted, what he had done to people,
what he was reaching back into the car for,
right? And then the way his situation was politicized, it becomes very hard to accept the idea that Jacob Blake is ultimately the victim in this situation. I'm pretty sure that's his name. Apologies if I'm wrong, but
so we may be talking about a different situation.
I think there was a van involved. He had a knife. He dropped the knife. He went back for the knife. They shot him. I think some political figures maybe visited him like shortly thereafter before the whole story was released. And then it turned out that he's basically like a horrible sexual predating monster.
Okay. It may be the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got the two separate issues there, right? Like who the person is and then the tactics involved. And it's, in my mind, it's acceptable to look at both critically.
Yeah. Well, it's looking at the totality of the situation, which is, and that's what I said. Whenever I first heard about it and what was going on, I was like, okay, I'm going to reserve judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at the whole thing. One, did he do anything? Like, was he wanted for weapons charges, drug charges? Was he a known person,
Mm-hmm.
And then you start investigating and doing some critical thinking and looking at stuff. And you're like, nope, they just took the opportunity to beat the piss out of somebody and ultimately killed him.
Yeah, for real. And I think one of the things that stuck out to me when we were sort of like breaking it down after the fact is a few of those guys, they didn't look like cops. And I don't necessarily mean in their physical appearance. I mean the way they carried themselves, the way they reacted, the way they collected themselves after the fact. They didn't look like they'd been there before. They didn't look like it just looked like regular people. I don't know if any of that makes sense, right? What I said earlier, I've seen that before, but I've never seen anybody in a uniform do that personally. Like you've seen Rodney King and things like that, but I've never with my own two eyes seen that happen.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's because, and I get what you're saying, is you expect there to be this level of professionalism, of them to do certain things and act a certain way because of the training that they've been through. And they didn't do any of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I'm not a defensive tactics instructor, but at one point in the video, the kid has his arm up, and he has his arm up for a super long period of time while he's kind of leaning on the ground, and they're telling him to get on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that tells me they know what to do, they know what to say, but they're not processing what's actually happening.
Right.
Grab his arm. But honestly, Jeremy, it's hard to say that because, I think when you've been on the job, you've been in situations where people have criticized what you do and you're making the best choice in your mind available in this rapidly evolving high-speed situation. But it didn't look like a rapidly evolving high-speed situation, given the number of people that were there.
Yeah.
It seemed like nobody really knew what to do.
Yeah.
What are we do? How? Okay, you do this. I do this. The arm goes this way. Now he goes this way. Then this happens. That sequence was lacking, and it just seemed sloppy.
Yeah.
It just seemed sloppy.
You would think with being a specialized unit,
right,
that they would know that stuff.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the whole, who are we letting into these professions? with cutting the standards, man. I mean, you cut the standards and cut the standards and cut the standards, and eventually these are the consequences right now. This is what we're seeing, and it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think you had said that the officers involved in that, or some of them had been hired after those sort of standards dropped, and I would want to see, like, if I'm gonna accuse somebody of being wrong, I want to personally know that they're wrong, right? And that's not like a cop's way of skirting the responsibility. What happened shouldn't have happened. I can't see any excuse for it, and there's one that has yet to emerge, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's what it looks like. It looks like a group of people that don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And just revert to these sort of like primitive ways to handle a situation like that, which didn't even really get handled.
No.
It's, so, I think one of the things that first came to mind when I saw it is like, okay, I'm waiting to hear that this guy like drove through a bus full of nuns, and there's this like horrible thing.
Yeah.
Not to excuse what they did, right? But then it makes it more.
You understand their frame of mind a little bit better.
Sure.
Like and I'm not saying it's acceptable, so don't think that that's what I'm saying. But I could see how if something like that had happened. Like this guy had been, like he shot up a daycare and they were chasing him and finally caught him.
Right.
And then emotions take over and things don't get handled exactly the right way.
Yeah.
Especially because I don't think any of those guys had more than 5-6 years on the job. There was nobody senior there at that scene. So you don't have that cooler veteran head to go, hey, let's do this the right way, blah, blah, blah. You just see a bunch of emotion going on.
Yeah.
And that was my initial like gut reaction of, okay, he had to have done something like super heinous. Nope. He was just driving his car.
Yeah.
Going home.
Yeah.
And there's no excuse for that. And there's no excuse for one, the lieutenant with the fire service there not getting out of the fucking truck. And I'm glad she got fucking fired. I mean, that's just the only person on that crew that didn't get fired was the driver. And I don't know why. Because usually the driver is a senior personnel too. And they should have got out. And those two young guys both of them had like 2-3 years on. That's a bad situation for them to be in.
Yeah.
They need leadership and guidance. You can't expect them in a situation like that is emotionally charged to make good decisions. There needs to be somebody there with them. So she should have been out of the rig saying, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And then they would have been fine because they would have done their job.
Yeah, man, it's embarrassing.
It is.
It's embarrassing, and it's what people are talking about. This is exactly what people are talking about. I can't see how there is not going to be radical changes in policing, and that I think leads to change. And it's kind of the overall subject of, I think now people are in the process of, okay, well, what does that look like, right? A reimagining. And then it goes to like the input of people that don't really know much about policing but know what they want from policing, and then the people who know a lot about policing but aren't necessarily interested in always giving people what they want in policing. That age-old battle. But
here's the part of the conversation, and I think it's a huge problem. A part of the conversation that never gets mentioned whenever we talk about policing is the prosecution of the crimes.
Yeah.
Because I cannot imagine how frustrating it has to be for police officers to go arrest this dirtbag on Friday and then go arrest him again on Monday for doing the same fucking thing over and over and over again. And it's like, why are you letting him out of jail?
So, yeah,
So they're all pissed off. And okay, soapbox time. So everybody's all pissed off about all these sheriffs talking about the new ATF rule. right, with the pistol braces.
Yes.
And they're not going to enforce it. And everybody's like, well, the cops don't get to choose what laws they enforce and blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, then why do prosecutors?
Mm-hmm.
If it's the law, it's the law. Enforce it. You know, I mean, the ATF thing, that's a rule. And Congress makes laws. The ATF doesn't make laws. Whatever. Not going to get on my soapbox about that. But everybody wants to blame the cops about, well, these people are back out on the street and this and that. You guys don't have anything to do with that. You arrest them, you write a report, you send it to the prosecutor's office. It's the prosecutor's responsibility and duty and what they're put in office to do. And a lot of those are elected positions.
Yeah.
It's their job to take it to court and get the conviction.
Mm-hmm.
Not because, oh, well, I don't know that I can really get him for the maximum, so we're going to do a plea deal. Or we're going to just give this person parole or bail or whatever, and no money, just go ahead and go on.
Yeah.
That is the fucking issue.
Yeah, you know,
it's one of the issues.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, obviously here there in Jackson County, it's a big deal. And, you know, but from what I saw, the judicial side of things, like that whole process is really an organization just like any other. And then you've got, there's good people, you know, that are then maybe sort of stuck under people that are a little more concerned with clearance or personal career track, things like that. But yeah, being on the inside, it's pretty remarkable what is a Jackson County self-defense. You know, like, yeah, nobody's going to get charged with anything here. Uh-huh. You were talking about people getting let out. There was when we were in a specialized unit, we had stopped this guy kind of along the 71 corridor, and he I want to say, well, he had a suspended license, and this would have been like his 7th conviction, which he's like, it's a felony at this point. So so he could
go be a cop in Memphis.
Boy, it sounds like that might be a possibility. Well, I don't know. I don't know if this guy's still alive. Anyway. So this guy had PCP, right? This was his 11 billionth arrest for driving on a suspended license. Like, this guy has done enough to probably should be in jail at the point that we encounter him.
Yeah.
So the gist is we arrest the guy, do all of the stuff for the various charges, right? And so these are a little different, because if it was like a seatbelt ticket, you give the guy a seatbelt ticket. For the offenses that he had committed, there's a lot of administrative work, the recovering of things, the documenting of evidence, the reporting, all of that stuff. We were still working on it the next morning when he was released. No, actually, he got into an accident and killed 2 people. I don't remember if he died either. We were still working on recovering everything and finishing the reports. It was at like 6 or 7 that morning. We didn't know it, but had gotten an email later on that next day saying, hey, this thing's kind of null and void. So, yeah, man, unbelievably frustrating. And the thing is like these were regular people. And what I mean by that is I was just talking to a buddy a couple days ago. There was another situation where I think there was a car chase with a homicide suspect. And he went to, I think he was going southbound on Paseo, and he blew the light at Cleaver. And it's like a Guy Ritchie movie. The dude that he T-bones is a dope mule, and he's got like tens of thousands of dollars and a bunch of bricks in his trunk. Well, that's sort of like, well, hey, the universe just sorted this one out, right? Like, yeah. But no, this was real victim stuff. Like it wears you out, because I think the question that weighs on people is why are we even doing it then? Yeah. Right? What's the end result? And it feels very unsatisfying to be like, well, you know, we did our part for those 6 hours. Yeah. Basically, we like gave the guy a bologna sandwich, and then he went out and murdered a bunch of people. Like, if you tend to be a glass half empty kind of person, but I think at some point, as you know and have seen, it's really hard to keep the glass half full year after year after year after year. Yeah, you really have to stay on the ball. Like, you know, and
obviously we don't run the same type of things on the fire department, but we do have those. We carry Narcan, and we will go to the same places, and the same people, and it's always the same thing.
Yeah.
They wake up. I didn't do any drugs.
Yeah. I ran into this fella a few years ago. He was a copper in KC, like in the 60s. And if what he says is accurate, he's the first guy to ever be the victim in an assault on a law enforcement officer in Kansas City. Because it became law, became ordinance, and then he got into a fight with a guy in an elevator. So, so we kind of got to know each other. He lives out south, and I was like part of this group that split wood because he would use a wood burning stove. This cool guy lived out in the country. But the reason I bring it up is we would sit on his bench, and he would ask me about some of the same areas and even some of the same families. Yeah, like by last name. So that's another thing, like along those lines of what you're talking about being on the job where you just go, like, you're rocking the baby in the middle of this disturbance, looking at this kid going, I feel like I'm going to see you in, 15 years, man.
Yeah.
Like, and that can be really defeating because I think the question that comes up is what are we doing to address some of the things that are obvious, or are they not obvious?
And again, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where there's that knowledge gap. It almost seems like where the people that are on the street level that see this day in and day out, we go, okay, this is the problem, and this is the problem, and this is the problem. This is what needs to be fixed. This is what needs to be addressed. And then you have decision makers who are well removed from the problem, who either has been years since they've been on the street or were never on the street.
Yeah.
And they're making policy and putting things in place that they think is a good idea that might look good for optics. Yeah. But in reality, the people on street level know this crap is not going to work. It doesn't work.
Well, I think over time you realize that it's like not everybody in that room that is a part of making those critical decisions. It's really more about having access to that table than necessarily like credibility to sit there sometimes, I guess. Mm-hmm. But also that, here we are sitting around a table, like, they did this, and fuck these people and whatever. But there's truth to it. There's truth to it, and along those lines, I was reading an article in Washington State. Some agencies are, I don't know what the phase of this process is, but basically what they're saying is that recruits in police academies will have the right to opt out of training exercises that they find stressful. So, hey, look, man, I would like to think that I'm a pretty progressive dude, right? And I always kind of want to like stay young in thought because I think just, anyways, but how do you train them then? Because I think one of the real valuable parts of training is realizing that you can anyways, right? Like, and not only that, but you in all likelihood will have to anyways, because you could die if you don't. Or worse yet, someone else that is relying on you. And so that's the like existential conundrum of these jobs, right? Like, how do you take care of these people that are in these situations, but still create the people who have the fabric to do these jobs?
So we did an episode with Rich High, Angry Cops. And he was talking about being at their training academy for his department and how he, he's a firm believer of the stressing people out.
Yeah, doesn't he have another channel? He's like a drill sergeant.
That's all his. It's all the same.
So
channel.
Unsurprisingly,
he is. He was a DI with the National Guard and all that
he's
stuff.
Funny.
Yeah.
I like his videos.
He's hilarious. He went on like a 10-minute freaking rant before we started recording that I wish I would have recorded because it was fucking epic. But Anyway, but yeah, I mean, with these, and that's something that people who don't do these jobs don't understand, is that you have to operate under stress. And the only way for you to train is to be stressed out. Like, you have to endure a certain level of stress. That's why, and I hate to point to, BUDS and SEAL training.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason they do it the way that they do it. It's because if you can still function at being the most tired you've ever been, the hungriest you've ever been, the most beaten down and broken down that you've ever been, you don't rise to the level of challenge. You fall back to your lowest level of training. So if you're not doing that and training hard and doing those things, then what are you going to fall back on? You're going to hold up your stress card and go to the criminal, hey, could you stop shooting at me? You're making me feel like you don't like me.
Mm-hmm.
But yep. Washington is really fucked up, because I read an article the other day, buddy of mine posted on Instagram, and it was talking about the fire chief. And whenever they had that whole chop, chaz, all of that bullshit, the fire chief ordered the fire department, the EMTs, to take, what was it, $80,000 or $100,000 worth of equipment and leave it for the CHOP medics to use. The people who are putting tourniquets on people's necks and all that bullshit because they're super medics. Yeah. So giving them AEDs and monitors and like IVs and all of this shit, it's like, it's domestic terrorism, and you're giving them shit to be domestic terrorists.
But additionally, all it does is really serve to validate the argument that so that's the same group of people shouting about defunding, mm-hmm. asking for what is essentially funding, because if they had the money, they'd have bought the stuff that was given to them, but then none of the training to actually appropriately employ this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that's the counter argument, or at least one of the more logical ones against defunding is no, actually more funding, better training, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah.
But there you have it. I mean, the thing, like, it's weird having a foot in both worlds, because and what I mean by that is, like, I'm about change, like, I'm about change. I think you have to evolve. You got to be flexible, bend, not break kind of stuff. But so just the inherent logic around it, like, I'm going to smash the window out of this guy's hardware store to then shout at you about appropriation. Like,
yeah, well,
what?
I think,
okay, man.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff was, I mean, it was stupid, whatever. We don't have to get in the weeds on that, but like what you said about funding, it's 100% true. The better your agency is funded, the better that your people are trained, the higher salary that you can offer your people, the more applicants you're going to get, and the better quality of applicants you will have to choose from.
Yeah.
So whenever you talk about cutting police budgets, cutting fire budgets, the consequences of that are you're going to have longer police response times. The police that do show up are going to be should be wearing the uniform anyway. At the very least, they're going to have less training, less skills to deal with whatever you need them to deal with. The same thing goes for fire departments. You start cutting their budget. So guess what? Longer response times. They show up to a house fire. They may not have enough hose to put it out. They may not have a water source. If they show up to EMS calls, well, guess what? We just used our last, monitor patches on the last one. Sorry, you're having a heart attack, bud. Hope you can hold on till we get to the hospital, which is 20 minutes away. Oh, and guess what? That ER is fucking full. So good luck.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's always kind of been that, like, budget cut whack-a-mole. And I remember back in the day when Western Missouri was open, running calls there a few times, and then it closed, and there was this limbo period of, like, suffice to say, like, what do you do with the Western Missouri frequent flyers, right? And you know, there, as you've seen, like, you get a glimpse into the people that are problematic, but are also people that need services, right? And so, like, a lot of homeless people fall into that category where, yeah, their situation is in a result of choices and things like that, but also there's a lot of mental illness there. There was a lot of other problems there. And so that kind of got to the point where you would, or at least I know, people, you'd take them to Truman, you know, and say, like, hey, go inside, and, you know, you can't breathe real well.
Yeah.
And so like,
Yeah. My chest hurts.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that, right? Because everybody's trying to solve the problems that are in their lane.
Yeah.
And then you get these wacky ideas, like, that is one of the things, like, reading that, where it's like, okay, no, now it's fully cane shaking old man. Like, how are you going to be a first responder and not have some degree of stress inoculation? And maybe it's just my learning style or whatever, but I had to see that I could, to realize that I could, right? Like, I had to prove it. And even, you know, like we were talking earlier when I first got here, doing some parenting stuff with my kid, right? Like, she avoids her homework, like a lot of kids do, because homework sort of sucks. But it's, yeah, like, you have to learn that you can endure the uncomfortable to realize that it's really not that bad. And, like, talking to her about it, it's like the example of getting shots. Kids don't like to get shots. So there's that whole process of, hey, you have to get the shot to get the benefit that it provides, right? And so using that analogy, and it's kind of the same thing to me. I genuinely don't know, unless there's this whole restructuring, which, you know, there's talk about making police much more specialized, sort of like a special operations kind of thing that you would see in the military. Hey, I'd be for looking into that. However, it wasn't that long ago on the other side of state line, you know, a social worker got locked into a house with a guy, and I think he cut her apart with a chainsaw, and he may have eaten her or part of her. That's gonna happen again. And so it's, you know, how you have somebody handle a situation like Memphis better that has never been in a stressful situation is beyond me.
Because it doesn't happen.
Right.
I could tell you that. I mean, I don't like to speak in absolutes a whole lot, but...
Well, I think you're right. I think you're right. I mean, I think if it comes together and stuff like that doesn't happen again, it's probably just luck.
Yeah.
It's probably just luck.
I mean, here's the thing. That is going to continue to happen, and it's going to happen at a higher rate than it's happened in the past.
Yeah.
You know, whenever the whole George Floyd thing happened and everybody was talking about it, and, you know, we had the pro-police crowd of, look, there are this many millions of interactions that the police have with the public every day or every year or however, whatever it was. And this is the number that turn out like this. And it's infinitesimally small. That number is going to grow. Less funding, less training. That's what's going to happen. This is a perfect example of it. So you have to have, there has to be a foundation, right? In everything that you do. Like your mental health foundation, your job proficiency foundation, it starts at the bottom level of your training whenever you first get on the department, whether that be police department, fire department, or whether you go into whatever job you're going into. There's a foundation, and everything builds on that. And if you're taking that foundation and cutting it in half and then drilling some holes in it because you're cutting the standards so much, well, guess what? All that stuff that you're trying to pile on top of it, it's not going to hold. It's going to crumble. It's going to fall because they don't have the complete foundation to be able to take all that stuff and go, okay, this is the right way to handle this situation. This is the right decision to make in this moment. It's going to be, well, fuck, I don't know what to do, but let's just kick him.
Yeah. And, you know, like the people that I worked with that were always the most proficient at controlling suspects liked to roll around on a mat and get hit in the face, you know? But I think most of them would tell you it's because they knew when this day comes, I don't want to get beaten unconscious and have my gun taken away from me. That's not how I want to go out.
Yeah.
And I think to be a good cop specifically, but first responder, you got to walk that edge of, like having dirt on your hands from doing the thing.
Yeah.
But also being above it, right? Like not resorting to just being winded because you beat the shit out of somebody.
It shouldn't be your only tool, right? If you're a black belt in jiu-jitsu, well, great for you. But if that's how you handle every interaction that you have with the public, you're not going to get very far. There has to be also the verbal de-escalation. Like all of those tools have to be in your tool bag, which that goes back to the foundation thing. The going hands-on and, using deadly force and all of that stuff, there's a force continuum for a reason. And you have to be able to use all the tools in your toolbox appropriately. Same thing on the fire service. There are times whenever we have to restrain a patient. Not often, but it does happen. And, there are times whenever you cannot verbally de-escalate somebody. Like, I'll give you one example, okay? We get called to this house, diabetic emergency. Nice, sweet, 22, 23-year-old girl. Is fucking an awesome person 90% of the time. But that 10% of the time, whenever her sugar drops and she's about to, like, code out and diabetic coma and all that stuff, they turn super violent.
We were just talking about this earlier this week. Last week.
And the only way that you can help them is to restrain them, give them an IV, and give them sugar.
Yeah.
That's it.
Right.
And you have to be able to do that in a way that you're not hurting them, and they're going to cuss you out, and they're going to try to hit you and pinch you and scratch you and all kinds of things, but that has to be done to help them. Yeah,
it's like weeding through what's happening to see what needs to happen. And that's what, like, in watching that video, those are the things that, so I back in the day, I enjoyed, like, being one of the play fighters and practical exercises that the recruits fight.
Yeah.
But in my mind, it just gave me a better understanding of the tactics, right? Because then you learn how to defeat what they're using. So you know how to roll into another effective technique, right?
Yeah.
It's practice. You just happen to get your ass kicked, 30 times. But you could see when some of them would walk in the room and they were tunneled out. And they just don't see what they need to do amidst what is happening. That they get into that overwhelm where it is, oh shit, I am here for a fight. You are here for a fight, unless you prevent that fight. And I think that reality sits down on people, and the doubt creeps in, and they can't come back from that place.
Yeah.
And occasionally some of them never get over it. Those are the people that are like, you know what? Hey, this isn't for me. Tip of the cap, man. I respect that decision, you know? And I admire those people because they at least threw their hat in the ring, right?
Yeah. Well, and they were self-aware enough to get out.
Right.
You know?
To make it to where you always have this out, because when you finish, when you're on the job, you can't pick up the radio and be like, nah, I'm good. that one sounds pretty stressful. Yeah. I'll pass. If you need me for anything, I'm going to be in the break room.
I'm on my break,
Yeah.
Union break.
Yeah, you can't. I remember the very first call I got. I feel like my heart rate was 300 beats per minute, and it was a guy that took a dump on the lawn of the courthouse. And I'm so glad that's what it was, because it made me realize, like, man, you just take what comes down the pipe. And I actually knew the guy. I had encountered him before when I was on break-in. He was just kind of one of those, like, lovable scamp homeless guys. He didn't give a shit that it was the courthouse. He's like, what are you going to do, put me in jail? Like, okay. Yeah, you took a dump right in the lawn of the courthouse.
You know what?
It's pretty uncomfortable too. He had doo-doo on his hands.
Give that guy a tip of the cap.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, man. I mean, and that's the thing, though. Like, you go to your first fire or your first call or whatever, and it's fucking stressful.
Yeah.
How are you gonna train in a manner that if you get stressed out, you don't have to do it, or you think you might get stressed out, you don't have to. So I'm going to pull up to this, rocking house fire with people hanging out the windows, and we got to go save some cats or whatever. and I've got a firefighter or two that goes, "Hey, Cap, that looks really scary."
Whoa, like this is a real fire. Like this is a fire guy.
Yeah. I mean, like, this is not what Chicago Fire showed me.
Right, yeah.
Like, I thought I would be doing undercover work. No, jackass, grab the line.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's funny in a way, but it's not funny because that's just eroding, like, the standard and the culture and the competency. Like, I mean, do these people not understand, like, these professions require a level of competency that, like, they have no concept of?
Well, I think that's the thing, right? Is how do all the respective perspectives get to a point where they really kind of understand what they are asking when they ask things of the other side? And that goes in all the different directions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's very easy, and you hear it often in first response, and I think it just comes from that jaded, like, place where people have to, they become callous because they feel like they need to, you know, because you see a lot of bad shit that you can't, like, there really isn't an explanation for it. It just, you know, come to terms with it. I forgot what we were talking about for the 6th time.
Oh my goodness. Standards and the erosion of our culture, and
No, it was something
how the
with the
ATF
youngsters.
sucks.
Something with the, something with the, no, I got it. I need a notepad next time.
Didn't you say that last time?
I have a notepad.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I worry, you know, one of the things that sticks out in my mind is these videos where you would see, like, hypo and troopers, who I have a ton of respect for because their closest person is like a half an hour away.
On a
Now,
good day.
Their use of force continuum is a little different to a lot for that, but you would see the ones, you'd watch these dash cams where you can see the person they're dealing with is a straight up predator and is looking for that outlet to murder them. Mm-hmm. And you're watching and you're seeing, it's almost like a horror movie. You know, because you know, and you hear the way they whimper when they get hit, mm-hmm. you know, and the, like, actual fear as they realize that this guy's standing over them with a gun. You're just going to make a lot more of those.
Yeah.
Because, you know, there are people that navigate this world by being predators. And, you know, it's not that whole, like, sheepdog, I hunt the evil, you pretend doesn't exist, but it also kind of is, you know?
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens, man. You know, the education stuff, the not needing a college degree, I can get behind that. I mean, a lot of these things, my question would be, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? You know, like, and not just to raise recruitment numbers, but is there really no plan? I mean, that's hard for me to believe that there isn't something that's being laid out. And where does that input come in that process to say, this may not be a great idea for these reasons. We don't know what we don't know, but it just doesn't seem like it's there. Like, how do you take and train someone to do a very, very stressful job, but not expose them to stress, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like, how do you make a SEAL? They just don't ever get in the pool.
Yeah.
You know?
you don't have to go through buds.
Right.
Yeah, you don't have to go through land warfare.
Just an eel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll give you your trident and you go hang out with the fellas.
So, okay, hey, if there's a plan for that, cool. But as it applies to first response, if my house burns down in the process or something bad happens to somebody that I care about, it's kind of on your idea, man. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know? The education stuff, hey, whatever. Yeah, I mean, there was a cop that I worked with, one of the better cops that I ever worked with. He had a GED, you know. Mm-hmm. Now he's going to med school, you know. Yeah. It didn't necessarily have anything to do with his aptitude, more his attitude about the education system, which I get it.
Yeah.
You know, and so, but I think
if you're going to take that part of a requirement away, then you better have a very robust academy and training cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think sometimes having a degree is looked at as this person was willing to do what it takes to get the actual degree. Mm-hmm. The degree itself doesn't really matter all the time. And then you sort of get into sometimes these things that are part of the process, and there's probably a good reason for it, but then there are these outlying situations. And what I mean is there was a guy in my academy class who was a flight instructor. He flew Blackhawks. This guy was a helicopter pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And probably could have, he had to wait 5 years to be eligible to transfer to the department's helicopter unit because that's just the requirement, right? Which there's the whole okay, there's a need for the requirement because there's a process, there's training, there's stuff like that. But it's the same thing as like if somebody owned a go-kart track and they told Ayrton Senna he couldn't drive it until he watched their safety video. Dude, I'm a race car driver.
Standards are standards.
Yes, and so that is then where the standards I feel like there maybe could be more people that are like, okay, let's look at this critically as opposed to just like this is the thing,
Yeah, I think I don't disagree with you. But I think there's a certain there's got to be a point. There's a point in there somewhere where it's like there's a reason for this.
Totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree.
If you're gonna, whatever, to the helicopter division, you have to spend some time in patrol because there's maybe some things in patrol that are gonna inform you of what you do in the helicopter division.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to learn the streets better and you're going to do whatever it may be. I don't know because I don't know anything about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I would think that there's some procedural things that would be beneficial,
Yeah. Yeah. So education, what's it look like on paper? What are we trying to accomplish here? And other standards, physical standards has always been a thing. I remember when I came through the academy, we were the first one to go in what they called a college environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the salty people being like, these people are fucking soft, and that didn't turn out to be true. They produced some really, really good cops. But I think you always sort of get that, right? That's just sort of like the senior in high school thing, but there's also something to be said for the necessity around the requirements. So physical requirements, it's something people have always bitched about, but I tend to agree with the bitching. If a firefighter, if I'm calling you, I hope that you are able to drag my daughter out of the house if she needs that. I'm relying on you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least the hope that if I can't, you will.
Yeah.
And so, when those sorts of things vacillate, how are you going to accomplish the task at hand?
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to one of the things that I've kind of started saying more recently. Kind of narrowed it down to can and will. So can you do the job and will you do the job?
Yeah.
Because there are people that can do the job that won't, and people that would do the job if they were able to. But they're just not physically able or mentally capable or whatever. The drive is there, just the ability's not.
Yeah.
And, I mean, for me, that's all I care about. Can you and will you?
Yeah.
And if you have those two things, we'll make the rest of it work.
Yeah, character, especially in these professions, has always kind of been, it's probably the most important sort of
your reputation. Yeah.
Well, and people's reputations can dip and dive, and there's three sides to every story all the time, but it's the consistency of that character. At one point, I think maybe it was one of the chiefs had said, and by that I mean chief of police, although maybe one of the chiefs said it, but that they could forgive a mistake of the heart before they could forgive a mistake of the mind, which I really like that, because at the end of the day, the people that are doing these jobs are just people, right? But it's the mistakes of the mind that are more representative of a person's character, and these jobs do require a different type of person. And that's what I mean talking about watching the Memphis video is they didn't seem like they were what they were wearing the clothes of. They just didn't seem like they knew what to do. They didn't seem like they had been there before. They didn't access their stuff in a way that belied experience. There was just so much that was like, but that's the thing. It's hard to quarterback, right? It's just hard to quarterback, but there really ain't a whole lot of quarterback into that situation. And if that really is a result of like lowered standards, do we really need to see anything else? I mean, they beat that guy to death.
Yeah. I mean, it's time for people to wake up.
Yeah.
Because what everybody's been calling for the past couple of years obviously is not fucking working either.
Yeah.
We've got more murders, more crime. It's went up across the board, exponentially in a lot of places.
Oh, yeah.
And what are we doing about it?
Yeah. And it goes back to that philosophy of like what the root causes of crime and how do you address the root causes of crime. And that's, I mean, my time seeing that stuff is just a blink of an eye, but you see a lot of the same stuff. It's that battle between accountability, I guess is a way you could say it, versus like empathy and support. Mm-hmm. But you need the balance of both, right? And like I remember our squad was down for the first Plaza riot. And I really think it was maybe only our squad initially, so like 8 people. And the information that had come back was, and this was around the time when flash mobs were a thing, like people go to the mall and like do Thriller.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we had to go meet in the security office of the plaza, and they were expecting a flash mob. Like I think there was a lady from the school district there, and she had said, hey, this stuff's been circulating via text, and so there's a bunch of kids coming for a flash mob. Mm-hmm. So what we were told was like, hey, just keep the sidewalks clear, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I was certainly under the impression that like somebody was going to show up and like shuffle rock, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
No, that's not what happened. It was like sidewalk to sidewalk, just a mob of people. And for the most part, like relatively well behaved. I mean, it's still a mob of people. I think we got a gun off one kid, stuff like that, and some stuff got broken. People got pushed into fountains, like typical sort of large group of people on the plaza stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't a flash mob. They weren't there to dance.
No dancing.
And
that's disappointing.
Well, and just the whole chaos and confusion of it all, right? Because it became this thing that was bigger than the original plan. So now you have people on the ground level that are waiting for input to make this decision. And at one point, it was like disperse the crowd. But one side is just pushing the crowd to the other side, pushing the crowd to the other side, pushing the crowd to the other side. So it spills out on the right and left-hand side. A homeless guy gets almost beaten to death at the Winsteads or maybe the park right there. And then after that whole situation happened, and maybe there was, and I just wasn't privy to it, I don't know. But then there was this whole, like, how do we address these issues? So then it was like, okay, well, we'll have, like, open gym nights and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, that drew some of the kids away that didn't push people into pools and bring guns and beat homeless people. And
yeah.
So, but the problem still persisted, right? And so that's progress, I guess, because the people that weren't inclined to do that anyways aren't present when it's there. So like it's less of a group, but it's still nobody, like for the longest period of time, and I still don't know if it's the case, people didn't go to the plaza. Yeah. Like when those problems were problems.
Yeah.
They just stopped going.
Well, and here's the thing I think that's important for politicians and all of those people that are making those decisions that kind of are out of touch need to realize. Like all these rules and these things that they put in place, criminals don't give two shits about them.
Typically not, no.
They don't care about the law. So all these things that you think that you're doing that are going to like curtail all this behavior, it's not. Criminals are going to do criminal shit because they're fucking criminals.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's no different than, they keep passing all these gun laws of restrictions and this and that and the other thing. It's like, okay, well, the only people that you're hurting are the people who actually obey the laws.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
Because criminals don't go buy their guns at a gun store. Criminals don't go buy their guns at a gun store. Criminals don't go buy their guns at a gun store. Criminals don't go buy their guns at a gun store. Criminals don't go buy their guns at a gun store. Criminals don't go buy their guns at a gun store. Criminals don't go buy their guns at a gun store. Criminals don't go buy their guns at a gun store. Criminals don't go buy their guns at a gun store. Criminals don't go buy their guns at a gun store. Criminals don't go buy their guns at a gun store. Because criminals don't go
No, not generally.
Not generally.
No. A lot of times, like, girlfriend will.
Yeah.
Yeah. Straw purchases and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's all, but that just serves to, like, prove the point that you're talking about is it's all, that's the whack-a-mole of the game, right? Is like, here's the rule that's our job to enforce it. You're trying to figure out your way around it. But that's, you can't legislate away certain elements of human nature.
Well, in behavior, I mean, people are gonna, like, look, we have a society that we have this agreement that, and it's in this unspoken thing of we're all gonna live by the rules and coexist peacefully, blah blah blah, because we have cities that are bigger than they've ever been that we know of. At this point in history, right? So we've got more people, less area, we're on top of each other. So there has to be these set of rules that we all agree to, right?
Yeah.
Well, invariably, you're going to have the psychopaths. You're going to have the people that just do not want to follow rules no matter what. In the past, those people could go off in the wilderness or whatever, and it wasn't like this issue that it is now.
Well,
and
for a long time in history, problems like that sorted themselves out. I mean, like, I think human beings have more time under their belt, and granted, I'm sort of talking out of my ass here, but if you look at, like, the span of how long humans have been around, most of that time, if people got sideways, something happened. And I'm not, like, bringing that up to be, like, a goon about the whole thing, but as soon as we figured out that it's easier to hit you with a rock and take your shit, that's what people started doing, and I mean, look at how, like, just at the early 20th century, we were still, like, people were still handling it in the streets.
Yeah.
And so I think there was more of a sense, and this kind of goes back to what you were talking about on the judicial side, like, criminals they look for soft targets. Criminals look for soft targets. So you talk to a burglar, they'll tell you these are the houses I don't bother with, because they're houses that have loud dogs, big dogs, houses that have wireless security systems, houses where there's a car in the driveway, houses with big glass front doors where they these are things they look for, right? And so most of them, they don't want to encounter somebody in the house, because they know that in the state of Missouri, if you're in a house you're not supposed to be in, it's the wrong house, there's a good chance you're going to die, or at least somebody's intention. You're probably going to get shot. And so there's that piece, right? That deterrent. And so as you move these deterrents, the criminal element then looks at, okay, here's my opportunity to do what I'm really going to be trying to do anyways. Like, continuing on with that, what you were saying. So how do you prevent that, right? And then if you're not enforcing it at a judicial level, where's the repercussion? What's the lesson? Like, how is a normal person that's just doing their day to day supposed to continue to be a normal person and do their day to day? I think that's part of the, like, here in the last few years, you've seen this exodus out of California, and people are moving to Texas, and, like, the boom of property values in that, like, northwesterly Montana, Idaho, Dakota's whole area, because I think people are leaving these centers because what is it? I think California, I think Los Angeles County, it's not a felony until you steal like $3,500 worth of stuff.
Yeah. Or I think it may be more than that. I read an article right after they had started kind of implementing that. This guy stole a car, got into a police chase. They caught him. They wrote him a ticket. He left there, like, burgled someplace, stole another car, another police chase. They caught him again, gave him another, 3 police chases in one night. And all he got was 3 tickets.
Yeah.
Like,
that's cloud cuckoo land. That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, have you heard about the rule that California wants to enforce now? Or the one they want to pass, the law?
I don't know, maybe. That
if you own a business in California and you decide you don't want to live in cuckoo land anymore, you want to move to Texas like Elon Musk, they're still going to hit you with California state tax for your business.
I did kind of hear something about that. Yeah.
How is that even legal?
Yeah, I don't know, man.
Like, on any level, How do they think that's going to work?
Yeah. It's got, makes me think of the earnings tax in Kansas City, like as a first responder, that seems a little backwards, right? Like,
yeah. Well, but here's the thing with that tax pays for, emergency services.
Yes.
So that's why.
But being an emergency responder, it's sort of like, wait, I'm also supposed to pay for what?
Yeah, you're paying your own salary.
A little bit.
Basically.
A little bit.
Yeah. Because, we don't need to get into we don't need to get into the weeds on taxes. I have a personal issue with personal property taxes. I don't understand why I have to pay taxes on something I've already paid taxes on just to own it.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous to me. Didn't we fight a war over that?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't that long ago.
No, it really wasn't. Again, going back when you take it, and you know what happened when people got upset about it?
Yeah.
They started shooting at each other. They started shooting at each other. So, I've kind of, I know this is an aside from talking about standards and everything, but here the last few years, I've kind of just stepped outside of the political spectrum, like stopped having an opinion that this person is the one that is adamantly correct and it's your fault, my life sucks, like that attitude.
Yeah.
To just watch it, like the theater of it.
Yeah.
And it could be really depressing, man, because I think maybe the trust in the media is statistically the lowest that's ever been. Like the people that are watching the media, like it's the low, because you can get so much more. I think this was on a Rogan podcast recently, but he's talking about like there's so much more long form stuff available, and all these issues require that. They require the ability to like sit down and unpack these complex issues.
Well, not only that, but if you look at so-called mainstream media, they're all run by the same like 6 companies.
Yeah.
They're all in cahoots together of we're going to push this narrative, you push this narrative, and it basically keeps your head spinning to where you don't really know what's actually true, because I mean, you could take it even down to like, okay, well, they're talking about this law in Congress. Well, you'll read a report from X media company that says this in the big headline of they're passing this, it's draconian, blah, blah, blah. And then you go read it, and what's in the article isn't even what they're saying in the headline.
Yeah, it's just all clickbaity.
And then you look at, Y media over here, and it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so I'm going to spend 15 hours of my day researching this one thing to figure out, okay, read between the lines on everything and find out what the truth actually is.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's fucking exhausting.
Yeah. The media used to tell you what happened and you had to decide how you felt.
Yeah.
And now it tells you how to feel and you have to decide if that actually happened.
Yeah.
And
I blame Ron Burgundy.
Man, Ron Burgundy he's the only one I still watch. But actually, my kid sings. She's totally into it now. That's like she drums too, but she's veered into the whole like vocal realm. Mm-hmm. So she's all about it. So for her vocal exercises, the lines from Anchorman, the Human Torch was denied a bank loan. Mm-hmm. Those, we incorporate those into our exercises. So shout out to Ron Burgundy.
Nice.
Yep.
I love it. I wish I could grow that mustache.
I'm sure you could.
No.
Have you tried?
It's very Joe Dirty.
Have you tried? Are you avoiding it because it's stressful?
I am. I have a stress card, and my wife says no.
Oh,
she says no mustache. Like if I keep the beard, like it's fine.
Just no single mustache. No
straight up mustache.
What's the issue with mustaches?
She doesn't like it, and I mean, to be quite honest,
we should have her on and do a discussion about the problems with mustaches.
It's and I'll be honest, man, it's not a great mustache. Like there's a station in my district. The captain has a mustache, and it's a great mustache.
Yeah.
And his crew has decided in homage of him, because he's, getting a little long in the tooth, might be retiring before too long. They're all grow mustaches to be like him.
Nice.
And no, not nice. Some of those guys are they're kind of probably from my end of the gene pool whenever it comes to growing facial hair.
Dude, I get it. I look like I've been rooting around in like a barbershop trash can. It's like I'll see pictures of Keanu Reeves who has like a patchy beard.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I bet it looks like that. It does not look like that. I see it in the mirror and I'm like, dude, just stop it with this.
Just no, I'm going to shave for the rest. No, I don't like beards at all. That's what I told my wife whenever I retire. That's my thing is I'm never shaving again after I retire.
Like full father time, huh?
Like, well, I'll like trim it,
okay.
but I'm going to let it go as far as it'll go and just see. I said I'm not cutting my hair and I'm not shaving, which I'm taking back.
It's like thin and wispy, like the wise Asian man in the samurai movies.
Oh. Yeah, no. I have visions of like, this like big Viking beard and everything. That's nuts. It's so not going to happen. It's going to be terrible. I already know it's going to be terrible.
Try hard and believe in yourself.
Yeah. And I've already reconsidered the not cutting my hair thing. So
oh yeah,
I'm gonna go ahead and make sure I continue to do that. It just gets annoying, man. At a certain point, it's like
growing it out.
Yeah,
man. I'm growing mine out a little bit.
Yeah.
It when it's in that limbo phase, where you're like, I just feel dumb.
Yeah. I feel like I look stupid. My hats don't fit right. Yeah.
Especially then as a dude, because it's like, well, how much can I rightly care about this?
Well, see, and that's the thing. Don't negate your feelings.
Yeah, I know.
Because your appearance is important, and if it's important to you, then, feel those feelings.
You know what, man? That was one of the, like, of all the crazy, wacky things that come with, like, doing the undercover side of things, that was really one of the more eye-opening experiences, is how much everybody judges books by their covers. Because, I would get followed around by loss prevention at Target, and I'm like, I get it, I understand.
I'm being profiled right now.
Like trying to buy a dryer. It's like, because you don't look like you have the money. I didn't look like I had the money. I looked like I bought meth because I bought meth. And so, but then just having this range of experiences. And then. We're really not that different. We're all kind of up to the same things. It's how we're wired, but that was a definite eye-opening glimpse into the way you present yourself is the way people take you. If you act like you are what you want people to believe, they will often believe you, and people would ask all the time.
Social media is a perfect example
of
that.
Yeah. People would ask all the time, like, how do you navigate sticky situations? And you give people palpable excuses. Inherently, they want to believe you, right? Mm-hmm. But, social media, that's one of the things that I really worry about. Having a daughter specifically, is, golly, like, the way that people represent what you're supposed to be and what happiness is and how you get there and what's rewarded and what's not. I mean, like, it's hard to see any substance left to it. I'm not really on there. If I'm on there, it's really out of necessity, like to make sure that there isn't something going on that I need to know, because I really don't watch the news either. I get my morning briefing, and it's usually like international, Associated Press, stuff like that. But there's talking about YouTube channels and stuff like that. There's a really good one called After School with a K, School. And it's these very, very intellectual, I guess, speeches or like excerpts from Alan Watts or Elon Musk or whoever. Mm-hmm. There's a really good one about negative people with Kevin Hart and Joe Rogan. But there's one that sort of breaks down what social media does to you, and we just watched that a few days ago just to like highlight the dangers of, hey, don't fall into this trap, like, because it seems like what it's really good for is making people really unhappy with who they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's all comparative, and it's like, I'm not where he is, and then you realize like that guy's got a 35% APR loan on it. It's like, that's all the like clout chasing, as the kids say, and it's super easy for people to get caught up in because it's that little dopamine hit. They like my dog,
Yep. And yeah, dude, you remember that old saying is a picture tells 1,000 words?
Mm-hmm.
Boy, they took that and turned it right on its head, didn't
Yeah.
they?
Yeah.
Because it's not reality.
Right.
Like, it's really not.
Yeah.
Of the way that these influencers or whatever portray their lives.
Yeah.
And all of the things and this is what you need to do, and buy this supplement, but it's like, it's basically like a really, really long commercial.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I mean, and that's all it is.
Yeah. I like the parody accounts because they bring like levity to this situation. And there's one, I can't remember what it is, but it's basically like dudes, like dad bod dudes doing all the classic like chick poses on Instagram. So, it'll be like a guy like, like he's in this really nice suite and he's like laying behind this bathtub with a towel wrapped on his head and like a thong, and he's like breakup vibes, and stuff like that. And they're like, it's a bunch of dudes with like in a row and thongs, and it's just their butts as they look out the beach onto the sunset. But the reason it's funny is because it like, I think that's one of the reasons why humor is so important, and just comedy in general, because it provides this opportunity to take a critical look at it.
It puts things in perspective.
Right, yeah. It brings levity to the situation.
Yeah.
That's like you were talking about Dave Chappelle. I don't know if that's on like what we were talking about Dave Chappelle earlier. Mm-hmm. That was one of the great things about Chappelle's show, man, is that guy just like...
Oh, he hit everybody.
Everybody got it. Yeah. Everybody got it. And some of my funnest memories in the academy were being at the range in the winter, because we were at the outdoor range. So, like... You shot. If it rained, you shot. If it's snowing, you shot.
Yeah.
But we had a big class, so it was split in half. So the half of the class that I was in, we would watch Chappelle's show in the like little trailer at coal mine range, and it was this really like you could see this varied group of people kind of have these like understandings about one another over this like funny experience, and. Hand of God, like watching Chappelle's show in that trailer actually brought the class closer together. And that was, we got this whole like series of tangents here, but that was another thing that I appreciated about the Narcotics and Vice side is everybody was just real about stuff, because it was like you had to have a certain type of person for certain roles because it just organically fit into the situation better, right? So it was free of all that. People just did their jobs. It was like understood this is the social structure you have to navigate. So being caught up in all that stuff really just didn't serve any real purpose. But anyways.
Yeah.
So standards. What are they lowering with you guys?
I'm not going to get into department specifics.
That's probably, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand.
So
what about maybe nationwide?
Nationwide, what it seems like to me is, so we on the fire side, and the article that I read about the police side earlier today kind of goes along with that, of where we're having a lot of department jumping. We'll have somebody leave here and go to a department right next door, but the new recruits, I mean, as far as standards for the fire side being lowered, it's hard to point to because I'm not in the application process, like, into it. I do know that it seems like the physical requirements have been lowered a little bit.
Okay.
And as far as like certain training aspects aren't as rigorously followed as maybe they should be.
Like what? Like what kind of training?
Well, just mostly it's physical stuff about, CPAT qualifications, and if you passed it here, it's fine, even though it's maybe not the same as this place's, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the physical requirements are even more important specifically on the fire side than some of the other first response. I mean, it's important in all of them. It's important.
Yeah.
But you guys are rocking around in all the gear.
Yeah,
it's a much more
this is
consistently physical job, it seems.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I've kind of butted my head up against for a long time, because it seems like in a lot of departments, not all of them. I do know of departments that take physical fitness standards very, very seriously, and it's a yearly, assessment and all of that stuff. In some departments, it seems like it's once you get past that initial phase, you're out of drill school, you've passed whatever the physical requirement is, then it doesn't matter going forward. Like you can become the biggest, fattest piece of crap, and there's no repercussions. There's no incentive, or there's no whatever you want to call it, to stay in decent shape.
Yeah.
And I obviously, as you get older, you deal with injuries because you're going to get injured in this line of work. It's not an if, it's a when, just from the nature of work we do. You're walking around or crawling around in houses that are on fire. You're lifting people that weigh 500 fucking pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? People don't have handles attached to them.
Sure.
So shit's kind of awkward. There's no gym workout that you're going to do that's going to be like, okay, you're going to pick this person up this way.
Like dummy drags.
And people get upset whenever I'm just going to grab your arms and drag you this way.
Yeah, come here, dummy.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it has to be an actual dummy.
Yeah.
You just grab a person and call them a dummy.
So things are going to happen. And it's always been my opinion that departments should take that a lot more seriously and treat us more like, and the term has been thrown around, and it's kind of gaining traction, tactical athlete.
Yeah.
And it's crossed over the police department, fire department, whatever, but realizing that that's basically what we are.
Yes.
We have at any given time, I could be, sitting in my recliner in my office, or sitting in my office chair in my office, doing paperwork, or, working on a training, or whatever I'm doing. And then within 30 seconds, I've got to get out to the buggy, drive wherever we got to go. I've got to put my gear on and be at a full, not a full sprint, but
sure.
I'm going from 0 to 100 in a very short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be at 2:00 in the morning. Whenever I'm dead asleep, I've got to wake up and perform.
Mm-hmm.
And, that puts a lot of stress and a lot of wear and tear on your body.
Yes.
And if you're not doing the things that you need to do physically to be able to do those things, to keep yourself flexible, strong, it's just going to hurt you in the end.
Yeah.
And it's going to shorten your career. And it's, not to be overly dramatic, but could have dire consequences, not only to yourself, but the people on your crew that rely on you. And it doesn't seem like there are some people who take it seriously and some people who don't, but there is no standard that a lot of departments adhere to with that.
Does your department incentivize it?
Don't ask me about my department.
All right. Well, so something that KCPD does, or did, I assume they still do it, is there was a run walk. There's a PAT. So you could get, I don't remember what it is. I want to say it was if you did the physical agilities test, I think you got 2 extra days off. Mm-hmm. If you did the walk, then maybe you got a day. I don't remember, something along those lines. I don't know the numbers on how many people took advantage of it, but it was really for the day, But I guess there's benefit to it in that way, but I totally see what you're saying, especially about flexibility.
Yeah.
Because you go from sitting in a car, getting in and out of the car, handling whatever, to a full dead sprint after a bad guy. And, if you're not limber, especially having all the gear on, hip flexors are an issue with the posture, stuff like that. So you start blowing out hamstrings, pulling quads. Then you're not catching bad guys. But beyond that, you're injured in a situation that's probably a bad deal to be injured in, and I don't know. I don't really know like what a good solution is to maintain it and keep it consistent, especially when you start to consider, like just in general the aging process. Like these jobs are a young person's game in a lot of ways.
Well, and I'll tell you that. I'll tell you the exact way to do it.
Okay.
The military's already laid it out. They have a graduated standard.
Yeah. So in the incentivized program, they sort of have that where there's like time frames in which you're supposed to be able to complete it.
Yeah.
But if you don't do any of this, you just don't get those extra days off.
Whereas, in the military, if you don't do that, see ya.
Yeah.
Now, is that in today's climate, is that feasible? Could we say, okay, if you can't complete this physical fitness test, then you're going to have 6 weeks or 6 months or whatever it may be to get up to the standard. Okay, well, you failed it. You're not going to be able to do it. All right, you're gone. 17 years, 18 years on the job, whatever it may be. Okay, you're gone. Okay, well, who are we going to replace him with? And that's the point we're at right now. But I think for the overall job, I think it needs to happen. Eventually there has to be a standard and it has to be adhered to, and do it by age. Like if you're in the 20 to 30 range, you're expected to do this in this amount of time.
Yeah.
If you're in the 30 to 35 range, if you're in the 40 range, whatever, it's 100% doable. It's one more thing of we need money to do it. We need somebody to run it. And it's very, very low on the priority list.
Yeah.
Because right now it's about butts and seats.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what I was going to say is, there's always been talk of how to incorporate it as to part of like your actual training through your employer. Right. Because if you want to be squared away, you're investing a lot of your own time, your own money, in that process, like your tactics, your physical fitness, your ability to shoot, all of those things, and like shooting maybe isn't the best one because it seems like a lot of the big departments, for a long time until budgets started to get weird, if you want to shoot, you could shoot, and you should be good at it. Because even if you're like 100 shooter, you drop somewhere around to 80% under stress. And it's not like you can just cack off a bunch of rounds. You're accountable for each one that leaves that gun. So, but that is really kind of the same.
Spray and pray, baby. Spray and pray.
Good night. Good night.
Didn't you know it's Call of Duty out there?
It's a funny story. There was a shooting at a hospital. No, that's it. No,
wow,
there was a shooting.
Josh.
There was a shooting. All right. So what had happened was some folks showed up at a hospital to dump a guy out of a car who'd been shot up. That's not the first time that's happened. There is a security guard outside in the parking lot as this happens. He's aware of what happens because it happens often at this hospital. So he goes to intervene and then winds up in a gunfight, so to speak, with the people in this car. But the whole reason I say this is like, God bless that dude. Glad he's safe. Everything was good. Nobody really got hurt. I don't remember if anybody that was up to no good got shot, but make better choices. But this guy was okay. But the reason I bring it up is, we get there, respond, and he's telling the story, and like he's still in that place, which is a tough spot to be in. But the way that he recounted the events was very like John Wick. The video was like Yosemite Sam, which I get it, man. Yeah. But that's just what that made me think of.
I did a combat roll, racked and tapped.
Pow, 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 guns akimbo. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of that, did you ever watch that video? And I don't even know if you can still find it. I want to say it was a Utah state trooper. And this has been probably 15, 20 years ago, maybe. They caught it on dash cam of him and this guy that he had pulled over in a gunfight. And they're shooting at each other from like across from this pickup, and they're just going around the truck shooting at each other.
The cop ends up getting
No,
like he stumbles down into a ditch.
no.
Well, I've seen that one.
Yeah, no, no. This one is they expended between the two of them something like 150, 200 rounds of ammunition. Yeah.
Fighting in a phone booth.
Yeah. Not only did they not hit each other, they didn't even hit either of the vehicles. And like the whole thing, like they are literally going around, walking around this truck, shooting at each other. And neither one of them hit the broadside of a fucking barn.
That's intense, man.
Yeah.
That's intense.
I'm hoping that the uniform had brown pants.
I don't know how you could not.
Yeah.
I don't know how you could not, man. Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of bullets.
Yeah.
That's a lot of bullets. And that is tight quarters.
Yeah. I can't even imagine. I mean, I grew up with, hunting and shooting, and like it was drilled into me from day one is you hit what you aim at.
Yeah.
And you are cognizant of what is behind what you are shooting at.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, it's, on one hand, I sort of like most of those situations are straight up ambushes, right? Mm-hmm. Or, and some of them may not seem like it because as we see it in the video, we're primed, right? Like,
yeah,
guy jumps out of van with AK, so we're like waiting for it to happen.
Yeah.
In that moment, and I think what often tends to happen is there's this overwhelm where people want what is happening to stop. And so they know that the way that they make that stop is to put bullets into what is happening. So you'll see those people that, probably in practice are like your it sounds bad, but 2 to the chest, 1 to the head sort of training drill sort of thing. But then the situation actually happens and they like dump 13 rounds, fall backwards on their heels and mag change because it's just what's happening needs to stop right now, and then I think people fall into 2 sort of camps as shooters. There's like your combat point and your precision, like there's natural inclinations that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. That's kind of one of the things about the job too, is those situations where it's like, there's 1 round fired, it bounces off a mailbox and goes through 3 people's heads.
Yeah.
Or there's 150 rounds fired and
nobody gets hurt. Yeah.
Yeah.
And no property's damaged.
Yeah.
How the hell does that happen?
Right. Yeah. Or like I remember one time there was a kid that got hit with a 22. There was basically no blood. It hit him like kind of by his belly button, and there was just this thing hanging out of him that looked like just a strand of hamburger meat. He died right there because the 22 so fast, so small, it just bounced around like a ping pong ball inside his rib cage. And then there was a lady that got shot through a car window with a 380, and her weave stopped the bullet. It slowed down enough going through the glass that it just lodged itself in her hair. And it's still a bad day.
Yeah, but.
Yeah, man, bullets. That's another thing about sort of the perception, right? Like that's one of the things we hear all the time is like, why don't you shoot the gun out of his hand? Why don't you shoot? If you're good, if you're at the range consistently,
just shoot him in the leg. Yeah, where all those arteries are. Yeah,
right. Yeah. So, but then that goes back into that discussion of like, well, here's a solution. But is it though?
Yeah, dude, I ran this call. So, is that one of my old stations, and we're hanging out. We get this call for shooting, stage for the police or whatever.
Uh-huh.
So we're staging, then we get called to come in. We go in, and this house is hamburgered up.
Yeah.
I mean, they came by and probably dropped 4 mags from an AK into this house.
Yeah.
So we're sitting out there looking, and the house is full of people. Nobody got hit. They hit the water line.
Yeah.
And so we're sitting there talking. The neighbor comes out, and she walks over, and they're always shooting off fireworks and blah, blah, blah. You need to tell them to stop. Like, ma'am, this was a drive-by right next door. You maybe should go back inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like people are fucking clueless. But, how do you expend 100 rounds of ammunition into a house and don't hit anybody?
Yeah.
And you nick a water line barely.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to have to replace some windows and put some spackle on some siding. That's it.
There was this, I want to say like back in the early 90s, there was maybe it was in Washington. Actually, I think it was in Washington.
The Green Beret thing?
Yeah.
Yes!
Yeah. They straight up, it was like, well, yeah, that story. Well, for anybody that doesn't know it, and chime in.
Yeah.
Green Beret or Ranger.
He was
or
a Ranger.
both.
Yeah, he was a Ranger. He was a Ranger, not Green Beret.
One to the other. So he, there's an issue with the gang violence in his neighborhood, and his attitude, kind of when it starts to bleed into his territory, is fuck around and find out, you know. And so the gang doesn't take too well to this attitude, and so they, you know, like levy some threats his way. We're gonna see you later on tonight. So he calls up the homies, and they fucked around and they found out. But there was like 6 million rounds, and I think one guy got shot. Maybe like there was a dude that got dropped off at a hospital, and they're like, this guy got shot at this thing, but not officially. Yeah. So the cop in me is like, well, that's not how we handle that. But the other side of me is like, yeah, well, hey, you know what?
I mean, I'm not advocating for vigilante justice, but
not a bit.
Here's the thing that I will always say is you have to be your own first responder sometimes.
Yeah, it's good practice.
In today's day and age where if you call 911 because of staffing shortages and the way that things are, you need to know a little bit about EMS and you need to know how to defend yourself because help is coming. I mean, we're coming in almost all places. We're coming. But it may take a while for people to get there.
Yes.
If you live in a metropolitan area, you got a little better chance. But if you're in a far out suburb or a more rural area, I mean, you got to rely on yourself. You got to know what to do.
Yeah. It just really kind of, I think sometimes where people benefit is when they start to sort of invest like thought, like the mental reps into what do I do if this happens? Because at least your mind is in some sort of place where you've kind of been there, right? When it does go down.
But I'll caution people with just because you think about it a lot doesn't mean you're going to be proficient when the shit hits the fan.
Or that it's even actually a good idea. Like it's not the move to just pull some theories out of your ass. So like an example would be, you know, you hear more about like, there's all these apocalyptic movies, right? And it's like even the memes, like what's next? You know, like zombie apocalypse. But like most people are going to go right to the highways. Don't go to the highways. You're just going to be like an exodus of people on foot trying to get away from the highway. Stuff like that, where you know you just. No, like invest some thought into like, I'll keep this here for safety. Well, what if I can't get to that? Like, you know, just those next steps. I mean, you hear that sort of stuff. Like, I think being a cop, a lot of people that are interested in like getting their CCW or they want to buy a gun for home defense. And a lot of the time people just want what they want. You know, so you could tell them like, hey, here's my recommendation and here's why this is my recommendation. And they're like, yeah, but this has a drum magazine. Okay, well then get it, you know, like, or, you know, I saw this and I mean, better to have it, not need it. Right. Like I would rather have a blunderbuss than a hoagie if somebody breaks into my house. But honestly, I don't want either of them.
I think I would just use a bat at that point.
Right.
It's more reliable.
Right. But, you know, people just don't go to that place, which I sort of understand because it's like that's most of what we deal with is people who. I mean, how many times have people have said to you like, "I never thought this would have happened." Like I've been to 3 of these today. You know? I got a buddy who he was just telling. Sorry. He's like in his 60s. He doesn't know how to change his own tire. Like he's never. Which hey, you know, like I'm not being critical of him. I like the guy, but. Maybe it's just a mindset thing. Like when I first got a car, it was like, what do I need to know about this thing? As opposed to what do I do if this thing, like who do I call if this thing happens? We were sitting at the kitchen table the other day and it was 3 of the younger guys and we're sitting there having some kind of conversation and it kind of turned to cars a little bit. And somebody said something, I can't remember what they said, and I said, oh, you mean the valve stem? Or whatever, and they all looked at me like I had 2 fucking heads. They had no fucking clue what a valve stem was. Yeah. And I was like, you know, the thing that you put air in your tires? Yeah. And they're like, oh, yeah, that thing. I just call that a tire nipple. Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I quit. I'm done. Like
That's how you get a nickname. So that guy's tire nipple from now on.
Exactly.
That's your nickname. Yep. And that's how nicknames happen. You don't get to pick your own nickname. It reminds you of this moment that is supposed to go, oh, I'm a normal person like the rest of us. That's why I'm shit break.
Yeah.
You know?
And that goes back to the whole, like, the knowledge gap thing. You know, like, whenever I was a kid, I grew up with my dad working on cars, and I was out there with him, and, you know, so I learned about that stuff, and I learned about guns, and I learned about hunting, and I learned about all the redneck shit, because that's where I grew up.
Right.
But, you know, come and move to the city, and it's like, there's some stuff that I don't fucking know, and, like, places like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Why's that?
Yeah.
Oh.
You know, I wonder if there's like a plumbers podcast where they're sitting around being like, these fucking idiots, you know, like,
Probably.
Yeah. And like, well, you know, why I don't understand why they didn't use a shark bite on the pecs there. And it's like, well, because I'm a fucking cop, dude. I'm not a plumber. You know, like, I wonder if people listen to this and they're like, these guys are throwing fastballs at people with no mitt, you know, because it's just what we know. I mean, it has to be that. I know that that's true because I think about like 20-year-old me and what a dipshit that kid was, you know, and it was just like, Jesus, take the wheel through life, right? So it's sort of amazing to like see that kid and be like, well, the stars align for you to not fall off a building or, you know, like.
I mean, hopefully, you know, as you age and get older and you get wiser.
You get grumpier about tire valves.
you acquire more knowledge, and then it is beholden on you to pass that knowledge on.
Yes. And that's like the cycle that we're all in is the like, you know, we bitch about the stuff that we know to be true, and the people who haven't yet seen it are like, whatever, Dad, and then they live it, and then they bitch about the stuff they know to be true, and you know, that's like the ebb and flow of it all. But all of that said, now figure out what you're gonna do when shit goes bad, right? Because it's that is really a matter of when. You know, like you're at some point you're gonna encounter something, and so there's just little things that you can do, like be a little more prepared. Have a first aid kit in your car, and not the like welly one from Target. One that, you know, because you can only put like so many blister bandages on a sucking chest wound. You know, like
well, I mean,
so just those little bit of things, like the responsibility that you take as a parent, like just knowing how to handle some of the basics that'll buy you some more time. You know, and then just kind of come in terms with some of the things that have to do with conflict. Like, what are you willing to do? And so if, hey, defending yourself and your family in a violent way, that's not for you. Okay, that's your choice. But you need to know that going into it. Yeah. Right?
Well, that's Matt Domyancic, who I had on the podcast yesterday. He posted a picture on Instagram a couple days ago. And it was of this National Guard guy carrying this woman who had a baby through these floodwaters, and who was obviously the guy in front of him was her husband carrying a backpack and a pair of shoes. And it's like, no, like not even close to, are you fucking kidding me? Yeah. Like, carry your family. You know, if that's what needs to happen, don't rely on somebody else to come do that. Because we've seen time and time again, just in recent years, of shit hitting the fan and people being woefully underprepared. Katrina in New Orleans, the snowstorm in Buffalo. How many fucking people fucking died in Buffalo because they were unprepared?
Yeah.
And like, why are you out driving around in the snowstorm of the fucking century? Mm-hmm. Stay the fuck home.
Yeah.
You knew it wasn't like it just snuck up on you. And it wasn't like Katrina just snuck up on people. They had weeks of warning for that. Mm-hmm. And they did not prepare.
Yeah.
So take a little bit of personal accountability, personal responsibility, and do something about it. Like, awareness is great. And I did a post about that. And I'll probably keep doing posts about that. Awareness is a wonderful fucking thing. Mm-hmm. It's awesome. That's step one, though. You then have to do something about it.
Yeah, like, yes, the point of action.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, and it's, there was a interaction during COVID that this all makes me think of. And it was like very early COVID in this area when people weren't really sure, what does this mean? Like, is this some weird zombie? Like, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Right? All we know is that this unknown sickness is making its way here. and one of the grocery stores close to my house. So I left. Like I was like, I'll go get some things, and not like mad, like crazy prepper guy stuff, but I bought a bunch of rice and beans because they keep a long time. We needed it around anyways, and I actually don't really mind rice and beans, like a high calorie food, easy to make, et cetera, et cetera. But while I was there, I was also just getting things we needed at the grocery store, and was surprised to see that like the bread was sold out, except for this one loaf. And there was a guy standing like with his cart at the shelf with this one loaf. The whole aisle, the left side of it from where I'm sitting, is empty except this dude and this one loaf of bread, and we needed a loaf of bread. So there was this like, now granted it wasn't like, like World War Z or anything, but everybody had that sort of sentiment. Like everybody's on the same page. This shit's fixing to get weird. Yeah. And so there was this like moment as I made the corner of the aisle where he looked at me and I looked at him, and it was like the, like the Western.
Oh yeah.
And he was like, "Hey man, I'm waiting on a text from my wife." And I was like, "We need a loaf of bread," Yeah. And so, now granted it was a loaf of bread, and we didn't really like, we're going to survive without it. But there was that like little moment, and he was like camped out over that. Like there was sort of that frozen, like I need to like hoard this commodity, right? Like I'm supposed to get this loaf of bread, and there's only this one, and I got to check with her, and that's where people go. Yeah. That's why they start punching each other at Walmart about toilet paper and stuff like that. But that's what we've dealt with for years. Like that's what we go to. Yeah. And so I think it's a little easier for it to be like relegated to us because we just see it so much that those reminders are there, and you see those situations and think, man, they wouldn't have froze to death in their car if they didn't have a quarter tank of gas that night, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And it sticks with you, but even removed from having those experiences, sometimes it's hard to make sense of like, well, how do you reach this point in life and never have had to change your own tire? Because there's some sort of infrastructure that supports your inability to do that. Yeah.
Outsource everything. It's always somebody else is going to do it. Yeah. And I think we're dangerously getting close to where even emergency services are getting to be that way. And I use the analogy of, hopefully we would never get to this point, and it's like the whole call to action thing, whatever, of, we're going to pull up and a house is going to be on fire. We're going to look at each other and go, man, that house is on fire. Yeah. Somebody should do something about that. Yeah. Guess what, dummy? You're getting paid to do that. Yep. So let's go do that because it's our job.
Earn your paycheck time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's action.
That you were talking about Katrina. I feel like it was Katrina. I remember we were reading articles and had a discussion as a squad around a table because there were first responders that were not responding. Like the things had collapsed to the point where they were like, I'm not obligated to this city. I have a family, right? So they're like abandoning their post, so to speak, stuff like that. Yeah. And just had a discussion about like individually, how does everybody feel about that? Which I don't know. What do you think?
For something like that, if I were, because I went back home to Louisiana not too long after that happened, because if you remember, it was Katrina, and then like a couple weeks later, Hurricane Rita came through and hit the other side of the state.
That's kind of why I asked,
and I actually went back down there as soon as the airport opened up to help my dad clean up the property and do all that stuff. And I mean, there was no power and all of that stuff. To be honest with you, man, I would have probably just grabbed my family and left.
Yeah.
Because it's, and I get it, but like I get the whole, it's my job and all of that stuff. But at the same time, weeks of warning. The levees are not going to hold. This is the big one. We have to take steps. Now, if it would have been like, okay, we have a plan, maybe I would have said, okay, I'll send, Rachel and the dogs to wherever, somewhere inland where I knew, okay, they'll be fine there. I'm going to stay here and I'm going to do my job. I'm going to work. But if that's not an option, if there's no, well, we'll just weather it like we do all the other ones, maybe I'll leave. Maybe I'll go find a new job.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not the people, like, in those instances, which were terrible. They're tragedies, like,
Yeah.
but it's not the people that are like, like do it for Dale, that are floating by in a bathtub with like a case of Busch Light and stuff.
Yeah.
Cause like in my mind, they sort of made the decision of having the experience of the hurricane, you know? And so, but it's the people who have just sort of sat there being like, meh.
Yeah.
Like, somebody will do something about this,
Yeah.
and I wonder where that tipping point is. And that was kind of a big through line in the discussion is like, all right, for everybody as individuals, when is it?
Yeah.
No, my needle goes this way.
Yeah. And when do I have to take care of my family?
Right.
And
it's a valid.
Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, man, being from down there, that's the sentiment down there of kind of whenever a hurricane would come through, there's hurricane parties for a reason. Like it's always been never taken super seriously.
Sure.
It's always,
it's like a tornado warning here.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, we're going to get some wind. We're going to get some water. Some shit's going to get fucked up. We'll just have a big party.
Well, the first thing you do is go out on the porch. Like, it looks fine.
Yeah, exactly. But, and then that whole mentality, though, it's kind of messed up, to be honest with you.
Well, that's why it's a really good sort of like thing to bring up, is because it obviously your sense of duty that your good first responders have intersects with everything else in your life.
Yeah.
And so all of these other topics, right? Like how invested are you in your community? And then oftentimes when you work in a community that doesn't really seem that invested in itself, and so it raises all these larger questions. Like we were down in, there's always shitbags. There's always people that are up to that stuff, even in the worst of times. And so that's always going to pull on that string of you that like wants to prevent that. And when the Joplin tornado hit, I remember we were down there, and I think one of the things that was going on was there were people that were like posing as FEMA workers doing building searches, and the code, right?
Yeah.
That you paint on the door and what those numbers represent. Well, they were just making shit up. So there was initially a suspicion because actual workers were seeing this going, this is just gobbledygook. What's this all about? Well, then they end up researching a building and finding an old lady that's trapped in the basement alive. Mm-hmm. And she basically said like, these people came in my house. They looted everything that was still there. Like I heard the sound of spray paint. So everything came together. And then it became a situation of like catching these looters that are operating on that level. Right. Yeah. But it's something that's come to my mind because like a lot of people in this area don't know Kansas City is a target. Like we're insulated. Like we're probably not going to get a tsunami, probably not going to get a blizzard. We're always in Tornado Alley, but we're a communications hub and we're one of the 500 nuclear targets. If you don't know how that works, like the assumption is that that's the mutually assured destruction component of nuclear war. Yeah. They're not going to shoot at first at military targets or silos because you're essentially shooting at an empty silo. They shoot one, you shoot one. But the point is, Kansas City is one of the targets.
Well, yeah, you hit a bomb here in St. Louis, and you've effectively cut the country in half.
And both are 2 of the 500 targets. Yeah. So, what do you do when that shit happens? Like, in my mind, that's one of the things that started to enter my thinking after becoming a first responder is you really should think about some of this stuff, and you realize how much you've relied on everything working the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah. Well, prepare yourself.
Yeah.
Take a little personal responsibility with your mental health, your physical health, and being prepared to be your own first responder.
Yeah. And since we're talking about standards, like don't try to meet the standards that are presented to you always, I just have higher standards for yourself.
Yeah. Not bad goals.
No.
So you got some closing thoughts?
No, I don't think so. You got another joke?
No, not really. I didn't do any doc talk today, so I don't know what they're saying on the Instagram. Have you followed that? Are you familiar?
The doc talks?
Yeah.
I've seen a couple of the videos. Yeah,
they're hilarious.
Yeah, actually, after we did the last one, when I got a message from somebody after you posted it saying like, this is the guy he's talking about.
Yeah.
You gotta see this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, those guys are freaking hilarious. Yeah. Anyway, well, Josh, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you,
Appreciate
as
it.
always.
Yeah, it was great. Maybe one of these times we will actually get the other two chuckleheads here, and we can talk about some stuff.
We'll see, man. I'll keep coming back.
Yeah. So, all right, everybody, take care of yourself. If you are struggling, reach out. There are resources out there. If you know somebody that's struggling, reach out to them, let them know you give a crap, and let them know what resources are available if they don't know. And also, personal accountability is not an option. You need to do it. Do it for yourself. Do it for the people around you. And, yeah, have a good one, and we'll see you next time.